All right, hello everyone. My name's Rob Barratt. I think most of you know who I am. I'm from the Department of Archaeology, just across the road. Today I'm going to be talking about 3D modelling and archaeology, despite the fact that the title is quite cryptic. But hopefully that will make sense by the end of the presentation. The main question I'll be looking at today is this one. Is 3D reconstruction good research, essentially? And that's kind of the whole point of my PhD, in fact. We use 3D reconstruction a lot in archaeology, but its status is a bit questioned at the moment, and there's a bit of misinformation and skepticism about this subject. But first of all, what do I mean by 3D reconstruction? This is a 3D reconstruction. It shows an archaeological site. It's generated by a user, so somebody actually made the model. And it has elements that are real, actual archaeological evidence, but also elements that are a bit more fictitious and more hypothetical. And this is one of the main reasons why 3D reconstruction is not as well accepted as archaeology as it should be, and that's because images can be deceiving. So here's an example. What do you see here? A pipe. There you go. Thank you very much, Filippo, for biting the bullet there. You see a pipe, don't you? But I've actually cropped this image slightly. It's a famous work of art by Magritte. I can't pronounce it. But this is what the actual image looks like. And for those who don't know French, it just says, this is not a pipe. Okay? Now, this is going to sound a bit nitpicky, but what it's actually showing is that this is a representation of a pipe. Okay? So it's not a pipe, it's a drawing of a pipe. So the difference may seem very subtle, and it's not very important in a day-to-day basis, but when you look at that image, you immediately think pipe. You immediately think that's the reality. That's something that is actually real and tangible. But that pipe may not have existed in reality. It may have been completely constructed by the artist. It may be, a 10-foot tall pipe. So what we recognize as something real and authentic can be actually subjective and inaccurate. And it's the same thing with 3D reconstructions, where you've got these very nice images, these very nice representations, but how do you know how realistic they are? You look at it and you go, oh, that's an archaeological site, that's how the site used to look like. But there's no guarantee that that's actually what the site was at the time. And that's kind of the crux of the problem. So it's actually a question about what is real and what is fake, and how do we deal with this kind of dualism. And this brings us to the concept of hyperreality. And hyperreality is one of these big words, but it's actually fairly simple to understand. It was introduced by Baudelaire, who is a very famous French philosopher. And hyperreality is just something where real and fake are so mixed together you can't distinguish the two. So think of a reality TV show, okay? Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or whatever it's called, okay? So in those shows, you've got real elements, real actual actions from real people, but you also got scripted elements, you've got editing, you've got actual actors, you've got all these different elements all mixed together. So although there is obviously some genuine emotion in a reality TV show, it's all mixed together with something which is fake. So real and fake are so intermingled that you can't distinguish the two. And that's what hyperreality is at the base of it. It's something that is indistinguishable, real and fake. And again, you can see this in 3D models, because in 3D models you've got the archaeological evidence and you've got the hypotheses mixed together. And if you just look at the 3D model, you can't distinguish the two. But my argument here is that hyperrealities are not just a problem with 3D models, but actually we use hyperrealities every day, and we use it quite a lot in archaeology as well. So in archaeology, this is kind of the archaeological method. What we're trying to do in archaeology is access the archaeological past, which we can define as, the medieval times, prehistory, or the Roman era, different time periods. And that is objective. That's a past that is, immutable. That's how it was in the past. And this is only knowable through the archaeological remains. We don't have any access to the archaeological past. We just have the remains left. These are then replicated by the records. And finally, the archaeologists actually come up with an archaeological interpretation based on the archaeological records. But every step of the way here, you are going slightly further away from something which is objective and towards something which is much more confusing and mixed together. So every step here, you're adding a subjectivity, because an archaeological theory is still a theory that someone's come up with. So there's an individual element to it. And every step is a bit more inaccurate because you've got a bit of lost information every part, The archaeological remains only give us a part of the whole picture. So every step here is adding subjectivity and it's adding inaccuracies. And not only that, but the method we use in 3D reconstructions is very similar. We start off by looking at the archaeological past, same exact thing. We do it through the archaeological remains and the archaeological records, and then at the end we got a hypothetical model, the 3D reconstruction, where you got the real and the fake all mixed together. So what I'm trying to get here is that, in a way, 3D reconstruction is criticised for being unscientific in a way, adding all this uncertainty to it. But actually, it's doing exactly the same as what archaeology is doing. It's just a different methodology, it's a different way of looking at it. But this kind of is a wider problem of archaeology, I think. I don't think it's just reserved for 3D reconstruction, because archaeology borrows from a lot of disciplines. It takes from mathematics, from biology, computer science, many, many more disciplines. But this is always an act of adoption. We don't, as archaeologists, we sort of see this as another. It's a different methodology coming from a different field, and therefore, although there are similarities and we use it, it's not archaeology method. It's biology method. It's a distinct feature. But we forget basically that we are actually all scientists in a way. Archaeology and mathematics and biology and computer science all respond to the same methodologies of science. And an archaeological investigation is no different, in theory, from a mathematical investigation or a biological investigation or a 3D reconstruction investigation. And that's because if we look at what the scientific method actually is, this is kind of the simplest form of this. It's a theory confirmed by its true consequences. So an archaeological interpretation, flint napping in the Mesolithic or whatever you want to look at, that's a theory, and it's only verified if the archaeological evidence seems to support it. And this is the same in biology. The theory of evolution is confirmed by its true consequences. And 3D reconstruction is the same. It's a theory which is confirmed by the archaeological evidence. So we're all kind of using the same methodology, just applying it to different things. Another thing of this statement that is quite important also is that this does allow for subjectivity and for inaccuracies, because a theory is always somebody comes up with a theory. The theory just doesn't appear. Somebody has to actually put thought into it. Any scientist will have to postulate an idea, put forward an idea, which then they're going to have their own ideas, their own cultural bias is going to be put into it. And a theory is always going to be inaccurate, because if you have to verify it with the true consequences, that means that there has to be some leeway of being true or false. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to confirm it by the true consequences. The theory will be valid in itself. So we're following the scientific method, essentially, both with archaeology and the 3D reconstructions. And this allows for the subjectivity and the inaccuracies in it, which is quite important. Additionally, so we're talking about objectivity and subjectivity. There's this quote also from Shanks, which I find is quite topical. It's a statement about an image or the archaeological past. It's not strong and good because it's true or objective, but because it holds together when interrogated. So again, it's about trying to confirm what you're doing. You can come up with any theory you want. You're allowed to do whatever you want, so long as you can prove it or you can show it that it respects the evidence. So up to this point, what I've been trying to show essentially is that 3D reconstruction is not that different from archaeology or from the scientific method, but actually we're all working in the same kind of field and with the same ideas. But there is an important thing to note is that I've said that the subjectivity and the inaccuracies are legitimate. We can use them as much as we want, as long as there's a way to verify them, and that's an important thing. So in 3D modeling, we have something called metadata and paradata. Now, these seem like big concepts again, but they're fairly simple. If you think about it like baking a cake, okay? So I've baked this lovely cake. It's an amazing cake. You all love my cake. You've taken photos that you put on Instagram. The cake is great. And then you go home and you think, okay, I'm going to bake that cake again, okay? But if you only use the images that you've taken of that cake or your memories of that cake, you're not going to get the same thing. You're going to get maybe a close approximation to it. You may completely ruin it, but without, a way of knowing how to do it, you're not going to be able to manage. So you can think of the metadata of almost like the ingredients to your cake, a list of ingredients with quantities, the oven settings, for example. In 3D reconstruction, it's basically the software you use, the settings you use with the software. The paradata, on the other hand, is like the recipe. So I've written down exactly what you need to do with the cake, and I've written down comments to tell you, no, you want it softer, put an extra egg or whatever. And that's what you do with 3D reconstruction. You write an article and you say, this is what I've done. This roof here is complete fabrication because there's no evidence of it. You write that down. And that allows people later on to be able to assess and verify if that model is correct or not. So essentially you've got all these different steps, as I was saying before, and at each step you add subjectivity and inaccuracy, but if you can trace back from one step to the other one, so you can see where one has come from, then you can quite easily assess how much inaccuracies and subjectivity and how much you can trust that model or that archaeological theory. This also leads to the black box and white box research. This is applicable to any field, but it's something that comes up in 3D reconstructions quite a lot. So if you got, again, this is to do with metadata and paradata. The metadata and paradata act as your kind of white box in the middle. Essentially, just in case you're not aware of this, black box research is, for example, a piece of software where you don't exactly know what the software is doing and you have no access to information about the software. You just input the data and it outputs data, and that's all you know. There is a risk in black box research, and this image can show it. So if you look at the numbers on the right, those go into some kind of pseudocode. We don't know what that pseudocode is, and it comes out as a list of other numbers. Now, if you just look at these two images, and you see on the right, there's a question mark. So we just inputted a new piece of data, and we're going to get the result. If you just base it on these, just looking at the in and the output of the research, you may think, well, you know what? In the right there, it all looks like it's following the Fibonacci sequence, okay? So quite likely the answer down there is 13, okay? So if you don't have the metadata and paradata to show you where your archaeological evidence, how your archaeological evidence has been transformed into 3D models, that's the assumption you will make. If you don't actually look at it, I realize this is pseudocode, so not all of you may be able to understand, but the point is that at the end, that number is actually a 9. So you were led to assume something by looking at patterns in the data, but if you have access to the entire process, you can go from A to B and you know exactly how that works. And you have a way of assessing it, because, for example, there's a hidden error in there that some of you may pick up or not. But the point is, only by having access to this metadata and paradata are you able to notice that and correct it if there's an error. So essentially, just to sort of conclude the talk, we started off with a problem, which is representations are misleading, images are misleading, and 3D reconstructions are misleading because they're images. And on top of that, they're subjective, they're inaccurate, and all of these things are absolutely true. There's no denying them. But my argument is that actually we're not doing anything wrong. We're still using the scientific method. We're still using methodology which is analogous to archaeological methods. So altogether, we're actually not doing too badly, provided that we use that metadata and paradata to allow verification. And as a result, the 3D models are therefore scientific, and the 3D models are compatible with archaeology, and therefore they can be used safely, essentially. These are the various people I would like to thank. A lot of people. I've got a blog, and I'm recording this for the blog, so this will go on it as well. So, yeah, and that's pretty much me done. Yeah, thank you.
Has anybody got any questions?
Cool. Brian. Yeah.
So, trying to think of a good way to word the question.
Yeah.
So, essentially, visualization in this way
Yes.
is communicating to people what you, as an archaeologist, are interpreting the scenario as having been.
Yes.
Would you interpret the reality as having been?
Yeah.
how do you think that, do you think there's any issues in terms of outreach and communicating that and comparing that visualization with maybe someone who's written a report and they've got physical bits of evidence, they can tell a story with it, but they don't include it in the 3D modelling because they don't know what they're including and excluding, whereas you're kind of almost inferring things.
Yeah, so the 3D modelling does force you to make choices. That's the difference with publication. Publication, you can just go, there's all these different theories, I'm not going to commit to one. With 3D modelling, you do have to commit. It's just the way it is, you know. You have to present a roof as it is, as you think it may be. So it's always the best case scenario that you're trying to go for. So that's kind of the crux of the problem. While in publication there's space for you to be able to explain your choices, in 3D modelling there isn't as much space essentially. But again, I think the use of metadata and paradata can really help here, because although you have museum exhibitions where you can't really present the metadata and paradata there, or publications where you can only write so much, you can still write big articles in other sort of smaller papers and stuff, and that's still getting the information out, and I think that's the important thing. As long as there's a way for people to look at it, that's great. And I think, like, also again, it's a critique that's done to 3D construction a lot, but it's a wider problem, because you know, an archaeological exhibition, an archaeological display is still going to present a narrative, a single narrative. If you go to a museum, they, you know, if they're talking about, you know, there's one in the moment about hoards at the Dorset Museum. The narrative there has obviously been simplified. You know, there's a lot of interpretations which have been, you know, completely ignored because you can only present so much. And we have the same problem with 3D reconstruction. But again, if you get that information out as much as possible, then it's kind of a bit of both. You want the general public to know as much as possible, but you also want them to be as informed as possible. So it's a bit of give and take essentially, and using guidelines and coming up with guidelines that can actually help you to get the most out of your information, and that's the way forward, I think.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions?
Yeah.
Is there a standardized format for the metadata and the paradata?
So that's a problem at the moment. So there is a few publications. There's something called the London Charter and Seville Principles, and there's a few different ones that tackle with it and sort of explain what you need to do. But there's no official, you know, form that you have to fill in and say what you want to do. Everyone kind of does it a bit randomly, and that's kind of where my PhD is going. I'm trying to come up with a consistent methodology that can be used in order to verify this kind of information. There is guidelines, and I've seen a lot of publications which do it really, really well, but there's no consistent methodology yet, but that's the direction we're heading towards. Thank you. Yes.
Just a small comment. Recently to a UNESCO conference in China, we're just sitting there socializing, and one of the guys brought up the thesis, there is no such thing as reconstruction. And he wasn't talking about 3D reconstruction, and usually he was talking about physical buildings. It was a big thing in UNESCO. And he said simply by calling it reconstruction, what we're actually doing is we're taking an existing old structure, removing it and replacing it by a representation of what we think it may have looked like in its original state. You can make the same claim for 3D reconstruction. The thought I have is that that we might be in need of a different terminology for what we are doing. I'm doing something similar than you in my research, and stop calling it a reconstruction, but replace it with something that is slightly less misleading in a way, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
terminologies are a bit of an issue. I mean, we talk about visualization as being the big field, and a lot of the work I do is actually not that visual. You know, it's getting data from the archaeological site. So yeah, there is definitely a lot of there's lots of misnomers. There's lots of stuff that can be checked and redone. I think the problem with reconstruction is that it's so widely used now as a term that people have just kind of accepted it as a thing it is. You can use 3D model as well. That's the other one that seems to be quite popular. I use that quite a lot in publications. But yeah, I understand your point of view, and I think you are correct. It is a misleading term, but unfortunately it's the one most people accept.
It's the most accepted, but I think it's because it has that implication that we're actually preserving something or conserving something when we talk about reconstruction, which is not the case. And it's almost like kind of brushing over it a little bit and kind of saying, it's we reconstructed it, sort of. The public happily accepts that.
Yeah, but again, that all goes back to the problem of the images can be deceiving, and how do you deal with that? And it's surprising. I came to this thinking it was a very practical kind of issue, and actually there's a whole theoretical background that needs to be explored, and the thing. And I mean, I talk about it being part of the archaeological methodology and stuff, but in reality, 3D kind of has a very vague methodology. Everyone uses it a bit differently. There's nothing really consistent, and we do actually need to work as 3D modelers ourselves on knowing exactly what we're doing and why we're doing certain things and how these are impacting different people. So the philosophical background is very important, and that's kind of, again, what I'm aiming to do with my PhD, is to try and clear it a bit, essentially.
Pointing out this is not an absolute, or this is likely not what it used to be in its original state, but an interpretation from another point of view.
And I'm very careful and trying to get out as much information as possible. Every model that, if I ever send a model to be displayed or something else, I always make sure I publish somewhere else, because they don't want the piece of information. So I did an exhibition in Malta where I had a few models displayed, and I sent them like a 2-paper, just like a note saying, this is what I've done and this is why these are not accurate, but they're as good as we can get them. And it was completely ignored, so I just rewrote it and published it somewhere else, because I wanted that information to be out. And it's very important. But again, it's not the practice yet, but it should be. But that's what we're working towards, trying to get it more accepted.
Pesky uncertainty.
Yeah. But uncertainty is okay, as long as you justify it and you localize it. Yeah. Sorry. Oh no.
You've been talking about like uncertainties as like when you have a 3D model, you've been talking about these uncertainties as you would put that will be reflected in the metadata and all that.
Yeah.
But it seems more like once you reach a model, you won't be able to see any uncertainty. So to the person looking at it, he doesn't know what's real and what's not.
Yeah. Again, yes, that is. Sorry.
Yeah, and you're talking about how these models are science, but then how it's because the line between the artistic side of you interpreting the model and what actually is science, it's fuzzy there.
Yeah.
So
again, the thing is metadata is obviously just it's the numbers and the self setting. I'm a big advocate for paradata as well. Paradata is the author actually putting out their own thoughts and their own process in writing. So it's trying to kind of quantify how much subjectivity and uncertainty you had to insert yourself, essentially. And I think that does help kind of minimize what's happening, because yes, if you have just the model yourself, there's no way to know what's true and what's fabricated. But if you got that, and then you've got all the notes from the 3D modeler saying, be careful of that, that's not so certain, be careful of that, that's not so certain. It's trying to quantify them. I don't know if there's a better way to do it. I'm open to suggestions. Again, none of this is set in stone. It's a discourse that's happening, but it is a problem, especially, as you say, when you've just got the model and you've only got that to present, and it's difficult to convey uncertainty in just that. I deal a lot with interpretation rather than presentation, so in a way it's less relevant, because what I try to present is the data, not the model itself. The model is obviously part of it, and I do explain why I use the model, but the data is obviously what people are going to be looking at. So it's less important. But if you are doing it for the purpose of presenting to the public, then you have to kind of be creative of ways to show that uncertainty. And there's things like pink cement where you color different areas with different colors to show different levels of certainty. And there's other ways to show that as well. So there is methods. And again, it's a work in progress. We're just trying to go, right, what are the problems? How do we solve them? And then if somebody comes up with a better idea, then, we do that. But it's putting those problems forward and trying to find a solution that works for now, essentially. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.